welcome to Drugstore Culture's 12th vodcast, and
Fantastic.
I'm delighted to welcome to our Piccadilly studio a great man, Matt Kelly, the editor of the New European, and I mean an eerily suitable time for you to visit us, Matt.
Yeah.
Before we get into dive recklessly into the horror show of what's been going on this week, tell us about the newspaper, because it's a story that I like it very much. You were good enough to serialise one of my books, so that's a winner. But also, I think it's one of those examples of something that is so counterintuitive. A newspaper that started recently and has been a success. So can you walk us through how it happened?
So the day after the referendum, I'm sure you remember, it was a beautiful blue sky day, and I was in Shoreditch for a couple of meetings because my day job is chief content officer of a company called Archant, which has 130 different newspapers and magazines and stuff like this. So I've got 400 journalists working for me, and we're always talking about the business of journalism, obviously. And I was in Red Church Street in Shoreditch, and I was in this cafe, the Old Press Cafe, and there was a couple of Italian baristas, and they were very gloomy, talking about Brexit, what would it mean? Then I went to buy a shirt somewhere, and there was a British guy, and he was talking about the fact that his Greek girlfriend, that they were planning to move to Athens to live, but they didn't know whether that was going to happen now. And the whole kind of general demeanour of London was the closest I can remember it was when Diana died. It wasn't as acute as that, but it was in the same.
It was subdued. There's no doubt about it.
Very subdued,
no doubt about it.
And everybody was talking about the same thing, and there was a sense of shock. And I thought, crikey, this is a really unique moment in British culture, because last night this thing didn't exist, but today there is 16 million people who now know they are a thing called the 48%.
Yeah.
They transcend all of the old political lines. It's not about Labour and Tory or left or right. It was a much more.
It's not even about Eurosceptic, and you see, I mean, this is
attitudinal.
Here's the thing for me, is that I had in the 90s. I would have called myself a Eurosceptic in the sense that I was quite critical of federalism. I had my doubts about Maastricht. Yeah. But what I never thought was that leaving was part of the conversation. That's right. And actually I remember Blair saying at an early lunch when I was at the Times, you be careful, you hang out with young man because their plan is to leave. And I said, no, can't be that. Actually, what's the very idea? We want to reform Europe. And he said, they don't, they want to leave. Yeah. And he was right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, okay, so you and I, in fact, you much more than me, because I'm not a political journalist. I'm a journalist. I spent 18 years on the Daily Mirror, on the features desk and running their digital operation. But what I am always conscious of and always looking out for is passionate communities.
Yes.
And I thought, God almighty, there's 16 million of them, and no one's talking to them. So I just emailed my boss, a guy called Jeff Henry, who's the chief exec of Archant, and said, you know what, if ever there's a time to launch a new national newspaper, it's now. And very short email, and expected, it was one of those emails, I've been in the job for 6 months, so I had a lot of kind of goodwill. I was still the blue-eyed boy, not anymore, I was still the blue-eyed boy. And I was sort of expecting him to go, yeah, nice idea, let's discuss whatever, and to shoo it away, because ostensibly, as you alluded to earlier, it's a stupid, crazy idea, He didn't, he said, let's talk about it on Tuesday when we have our executive meeting. So at the exec meeting, there's 7 people around the table: finance, HR, marketing, me, commercial, whatever. And we have this depressing meeting for 4 hours about Brexit. What is it going to do to us? Because the local news industry is in enough trouble already. Of course, yeah. And then, the value of the pound making newsprint more expensive, lack of confidence with advertisers, damaging our adverts, all of this really sort of depressing meeting. And I completely forgot about this newspaper idea. I was kind of subsumed with, oh my God, it's over.
The general gloom rather than the specific idea.
And at the end of it, Jeff said, well, has anyone got any positive ideas? And glared at me.
Bingo.
And I went, oh yeah, I've got this idea. And again, at that point, I thought everyone around the table would go, don't be ridiculous. Because you've got to remember, Trinity Mirror had just spent, I think it was £9 million on a new national newspaper, which had lasted 10 weeks or something like this, The New Day. And there was another group in the north of England called Cumberland News who had spent a load of money on a paper for the north, and that had bombed. So it wasn't an auspicious time for new newspaper launches. But nevertheless, the minute I articulated what I've just said to you about this new constituency of people got it, very clearly. And what was immediately clear was there was this, everyone was not only identified by having voted to stay in the European Union, but they were really pissed off now as well, so you had that self-identification, but also a real emotion, everyone was very angry about it. So,
and I suppose there was a mesh too between the fact that the people, your potential audience, was then almost willfully cut out of the argument, because almost immediately Theresa May framed the debate as Brexit is Brexit,
that's right.
Will of the people, no discussion.
And Corbyn as well.
And Corbyn, crack on, and let's trigger Article 50 as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
So that all those people were really being told, you are of no interest at all.
And almost worse than that, Matt, because they were not being told, we're sidelining you. They were told now, no, you are now part of this will of the people, this abstract thing.
Yes.
And people going, hang on.
Homogenised will of the people, yeah.
And also the other thing in the media landscape was Remain was really poorly represented, I think. The Guardian and the Mirror both did campaign for Remain, but in a very lukewarm way, because they've both got the same problem that the Labour Party's got. Most of their audience wanted Brexit. So the Mirror, in particular, and having come from the Mirror, I felt it was a great shame that the Mirror couldn't have sort of really tried to galvanise several 100,000 people in the communities where the Mirror's strong, in the north of England. And that could have made a significant difference, I think. So
I felt that the New European very quickly became the campfire around which everyone who felt this way gathered.
Yeah.
It was interesting. You attracted some big name people.
Very quickly.
Which was really impressive, and that added to a sort of intellectual momentum it had. And were you surprised by the speed with which it kind of settled into the media landscape? I keep having to remind myself it's only been around for a couple of years, which is, I think, in some respects, the greatest thing you can say about a paper is I can't imagine when it wasn't around.
Great. Well, that's very lovely to hear. It was launched 9 days after the vote. And people often say, why a newspaper and not a website?
Sure.
And for me, and forgive me if this is getting too philosophical now, but I've always, because of the trouble our industry's been in, I've tried to read a lot and try to understand a different perspective on why people engage with media. And if you go back to Hegel or Benedict Anderson or these people, there's a consistent theme about the religious nature of a newspaper. It's like a thing that you partake of alone.
It's an artifact.
But in the knowledge that there's
others
a
are
huge
too,
community doing it in exactly the same way. So was I surprised that people came to join us? No, not really, because I thought it was so crazy. That was the whole point. If we'd launched a website, no one would have cared. We'd have been out of business 3 weeks later. But launching a newspaper, people take an interest. People like Jonathan Freedland, who I used to be his editor on the Daily Mirror when the Mirror was going through that great period. Of really, really good long-form journalism. And so Johnny is a friend of mine, and he came on board for the first issue.
Yes.
So that sort of established its seriousness,
authority,
and certainly its intent.
Yeah.
And then week 2, Alistair Campbell phoned up and said, "What the hell are you guys trying to do? Trying to stop Brexit, Alistair?" Right, me too, So he came on board, and then the circle sort of opened up very quickly. And
it did.
You must be experiencing this. I would think people who buy into what you're trying to do are much more committed than just mercenary hacks.
Especially if there's an obvious urgency, which there was and is in this case, which I suppose is brings us to this week. And the first thing to ask is, the obvious one is, did you think there was going to be a deal at all?
I thought there would be.
You thought there would be?
Yes, because I thought the European Union would want to give Theresa May the opportunity to have something to go back with. I think from the European Union's point of view, they need it to crash and burn in Westminster. This is the crucible where it needs to fail. The idea that you could persist imagine if you persisted for generations where it was just seen like there was this Mexican standoff, and there was culpability on either side. So I think it was really important for Europeans to say, okay, we're going to go as far as we possibly can, and we'll give you your form of words. We all know it's impossible, this concept of Brexit, but let's see if you think you can get it through, then good luck. But equally, you'd have to be an absolute fool to not have seen how quickly this would come.
Well, what I find fascinating about this week is that, for 2.5 years and before, I guess, during the campaign, a lot of us were trying to say, look, you can't make a square a circle. Yeah. Boris Johnson can talk about cakes and eating them merrily to his heart's content, but the fact remains, you can't be in the EU and out of it. Yeah. There is a price to pay, and the likely price is going to be a loss of a place at the table, but a continued submission to regulatory rules if you want to, if you want to stay part of the customs union or single market. But this was dismissed, and it was often dismissed in very emotional language that to say as much reflected a lack of will or lion spirit or optimism or and all this. And what's finally happened, it seems to me this week, is that the rubber has finally hit the road. It is now impossible to argue anything other than, if you're in favour of the deal, this is the best you're going to get, other than no deal. But what's fascinating, and there was a hint of this in her conference speech, actually. People say it's new this week, but she did mention this at conference, which is that what was going to be my deal or no deal, there's now my deal, no deal, or no Brexit. Yeah. And this is a very interesting development, isn't it?
Yeah. And then now they're nuancing it retrospectively, saying there's a difference between a risk of no Brexit and an option of no Brexit. But that is very semantic. If there's a risk of it,
it's on the table.
And it begs the question: who is denying you the option if they're just saying that's a risk? So if it's a possibility, why is it not on the table? Why is it not on the table? And I find it, like my wife, right, looks at our front page this week, and it's the image of Theresa May up to her neck in water or up to her nose in water, and she says to me, "Why are you being so cruel to that woman? What can she do? She's trying so hard. She's being assailed from all over the place, and all of those things are true. But I find it very hard to have any sympathy for Theresa May.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm the same.
I actually think, and I wrote a piece for GQ this week saying that she is uniquely awful as a Prime Minister, because no other Prime Minister, and I include Anthony Eden and I include David Cameron, no other Prime Minister has done pursued a strategy for this country that they know is going to make this country worse off. No, everybody, all of the disasters started out as great ambitions. Even Cameron, who a lot of people responded to the piece and said, it's not her fault, it's Cameron's fault. Yeah, well, sure. But even Cameron thought he was going to get away with it.
Yes.
She knows we are not going to get away with this. And I think it's her job to stop a bad situation like this.
Well, her strategy, it seems to me now, is to try and sedate us with tedium into just going along with it. That is what she does. Her own only real talent is to keep on keeping on. Yeah. And so what she will be telling MPs now is, ask your constituents at the weekend, do they want more Brexit? Yeah. Which is, of course, the wrong question, because there's this false dichotomy emerging, which is over here there's Brexit, and on the other hand there's things like schools and hospitals and economic policy and poverty and all that stuff. So let's get Brexit out of the way so that we can...
they're unrelated.
They're unrelated. And so that combination of trying to mobilise popular impatience, say that there's no better deal on offer, and also imply that Brexit has nothing to do with everything, which of course is rubbish. That's her strategy, and I think it's a very dishonest one.
Well, I think it's completely dishonest. I would call her, I think she's a liar. I really do, and I know people shy away from that and say, well, no,
I think it's a word that needs to be reinstated.
She is a cynical liar, and unfortunately, that message of "Do you want more Brexit?" plays very well with the people that they're talking to, and I'll get no gold stars for saying this, but that leads back into the fundamental fault with the referendum, in that it is an absolute truth that most people do not pay enough attention and are not wired up enough. I don't think there's anyone wired up enough to make the right kind of calculation about our future on such a complex issue as Brexit.
And the Leave campaign's, I wouldn't say genius, but it's sort of cunning, was to suggest that it wasn't really a choice you had to make with much information. It was an emotional choice.
Sure.
It was, who's going to say no to 350 million quid a week extra for the NHS, but at the same time, sort of going for the kind of xenophobic vote on immigration. You go for emotional resonance rather than deliberation.
And it was probably the most modern campaign ever fought, I think, because it wasn't a political campaign. It was a campaign in mass hypnosis, I think.
Yeah.
And
it was a Darren Brown campaign.
Yeah, well, I mean, to that point, I was told, and maybe this is common knowledge or maybe it isn't, but I was told from immaculate authority that the guy who came up with Take Back Control was Paul McKenna.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that the Leave campaign had gone to Paul McKenna and said, give us something, right? And he said, take back control. Take back control. And that will become the mantra, And that's what, and that touches on every aspect of the lie, that we're not in control. Well, we are fundamentally, and now, by the way, we are completely out of control. The great irony that this was a campaign fought on the idea of reclaiming sovereignty, and that we've now ended in a position where we have completely surrendered sovereignty. The idea that I am now complaining about sovereignty, because Britain now, I can't remember who it was, but there was a European commissioner or an ambassador this morning saying it is unthinkable that a country like Britain would cede sovereignty in this manner with this deal. But that's where we've got to. But yeah, it was hypnotic. Take back control,
and now to continue the metaphor, we're back in the room.
Yeah,
people have been snapped out, so the question is, there are two bits to it, I suppose. Let's deal first of all with the Westminster soap opera, and then maybe talk a bit about the broader question. The Westminster soap opera is as ugly and unedifying as you'd expect. We've got, at the time of talking, we've had two big resignations and a kind of suspension of hostilities from Gove and Penny Mordaunt. Where do you think that leaves Theresa May in terms of the apex, at least, of Conservative politics?
Well, I can't get away from the belief that there will be a vote of no confidence in her, and that Michael Gove, who I'm afraid to say I think is one of the most cynical, not just politicians, but most cynical people in our society, just thought, what's the upside, And I think he thought May rather clumsily tried to put him in a position which was, okay, you think it's broken, be our Brexit secretary, you can fix it. He called her bluff on that. And there's no upside to him in resigning right now, because I think he knows better to demonstrate loyalty. The Nicholas Soames of this world are going to be very important to him. The sit down, you disloyal twerp comments. That he doesn't want to be seen like that. I think Dominic Raab has done himself huge damage in that vein. So,
being talked up by the Sun this morning as the Prime Minister.
I know. Well, I heard that. Well, I heard Jacob Rees-Mogg talking Esther McVey up as a possible Prime Minister yesterday. So who knows how crazy that conversation's going to get.
But that's always a bad sign when, as it were, anyone and everyone is being talked up as a potential Prime Minister. This is obviously not good.
Do you think, can I ask you a question? Do you think Rees-Mogg 4 months ago was seen as absolutely pivotal to that leadership question. Do you think he's still...
Well, I think that the missing figure, and I assume he will come out at some point today, is Boris Johnson, who is obviously planning, as he often does in these things. You'll remember before the referendum, he did a big theatrical entree to announce he was going to vote Leave. Clearly, at some point, he's going to have to declare his intentions. I can't help wondering whether Rees-Mogg is sort of the warm-up act. That he's going out, testing the waters. The tremendously showy press conference where it was outside St Stephen's, wasn't it?
You remind me of Boris Yeltsin on the tank.
Yes, it was a really, as if this was a major moment of state. and sort of slightly bizarre.
Yeah.
But I think that I agree with you. I think it's very hard to see how she avoids a vote of no confidence within the parliamentary party. Whether she loses that or not is a different question. Never underestimate the Conservative Party's collective cowardice, because what I think is that if she's sacked by the party, as Ian Duncan Smith was in 2003, he wasn't Prime Minister, of course, he was Leader of the Opposition, whoever is her successor will have a mandate from the Conservative Party, but will inherit no mandate from the public at all. The public will say, hang on a minute, we had an election last year in 2017, it may even be 2019 by the time a new Tory leader is actually elected. 2017, we didn't give the Conservatives a majority. They're propped up by the DUP using taxpayers' money, and it's not even Theresa May anymore. There comes a point where the credibility of a government that's sort of stuck together by sticky tape and Pritt becomes just implausible. And I do wonder.
Do you think that's a problem for them? Do you think that would bother them?
Well,
the alternative, because I don't.
This is the interesting new dynamic in all this is the death of shame, because even if you go back to the 80s, Thatcher's fall in 1990. Whatever you thought about Thatcher, there was a moment at which she was advised by her people and her husband, look, you can't go on. There was no numerical reason for her not to go on, by the way. She could have gone on to the next round, but, I'm out. It's over. That seems to have gone, and quite recently as well, because Blair in 2006 said, right, I'll be gone before the next TUC conference in 2007. Cameron, to be fair, knew the game was up and off he went. Some criticised him for that. But what's different about Theresa May, I think, is that she is unembarrassable. So the question is, if she manages to, even if she does lose, and they install a new Prime Minister, and the public and the polls just show we're not having this, you're right to imply, might they just carry on as a minority government?
Well,
entirely plausible.
I suspect they would, because the great fear
of a Corbyn,
Corbyn government, which is not just a fear shared by Conservative voters. I think there's a general suspicion of the Corbyn government, and I think personally it's unlikely that he would win a general election right now, because I think we've got an inherent belief that the Tories will, despite everything, despite all the evidence, that the Tories will be better at sorting a crisis out than Labour. And also,
there is quite a lot of countervailing evidence at the moment, isn't there?
There is. I mean, it's stacking up fairly high. But I think still there's that sort of genetic kind of that's what they're good at, and that's what Labour are good at. And I also think Theresa May had this. The one thing she absolutely hit the nail on the head in her conference speech was when she identified the flaw in the "for the many, not the few" slogan. And it suddenly dawned on me that that's Corbyn's problem, is that there are too many people in this country who don't know whether they are one of the many or one of the few. And that middle belt of people who are doing all right, but suspect actually maybe Jeremy Corbyn thinks I'm one of the few. That's his electoral challenge. So anyway, I mean, the evidence I think is fairly supportable, because in the single worst Conservative government, or maybe government ever, and people say since Eden, I think
the word since seems to be otiose in this case.
Maybe Lord North, and losing.
I think
America.
You have to go back to Hengist and Horsa, really.
all the way back. Corbyn is still nip and tuck with, and in fact Theresa May's approval ratings are significantly higher than his as a leader.
I mean, what's interesting is Labour is now. I mean, John McDonnell was on the Today programme this morning saying Labour could put together a parliamentary majority for a deal. Now, what wasn't clear was whether he was saying that after an election or before. But I'm beginning to think that, sort of as presently configured, the political class is incapable of gathering with any intellectual honesty, at least, around a deal or one of the deals that's on offer. Can you? I mean,
I think it's completely bankrupt, the process, and I think this is why I really do feel that a second referendum now is. It's not just hot air and aspiration. I think it's the most likely outcome. I really do, because I can't see. Go through. I mean, her deal is being put to sleep as we speak. So let's assume that is a
slow euthanasia.
Slow euthanasia. And then the other runner is no deal. Now, okay, so say Theresa May loses a vote of no confidence and a Brexiteer like Boris Johnson or Rees-Mogg or David Davis is installed as leader. Their agenda would be to push through no deal as quickly as possible, because there's no time for Canada plus
No.
or Norway now, whatever. That's not going to happen.
No.
The European Union have made it clear that they've stopped talking now. So I think there'd be a rush for no deal, and although there's no clear parliamentary mechanism to stop that, I'm sure Parliament will stop it. They will find a device to stop no deal, because this is where perhaps my faith in democracy creeps back into it. I just don't think that those collective 650 people will do that to this country.
Well, also, the other thing about no deal is that it's a very easy, in the way that Remain was quite hard to sell emotionally. Opposing no deal is very easy emotionally, because you just say, look, people will die.
Yeah, because it's shit. It's
clear shit. And the transport system will clog up, and supply chains that are vital to the provision of food. And these are real life, real time problems.
Yeah.
So if I was an advertising company, I would be longing for the anti-no deal account, because I think that's a not difficult one. And I think you're right too to imply that representative democracy really would be dead if 650 people said, yeah, fine to no deal.
Yeah.
So
which leaves you a second referendum at some point, or it's the cop out of all cop outs, but to throw it back to the people. I think a referendum to prove that the referendum does not work would be an elegant.
Well, my journey towards embracing the people's vote was very much based on two things, really. First, that I felt that the political class just was paralysed and stultified. Yeah. There was absolutely no evidence it had broken.
Westminster had broken.
And I guess the second thing is an emotional thing, which is I've got two boys, and I don't know if I want in 20 years to look them in the face and say I didn't campaign a bit,
so
for something.
Great fact is that there's now 2 million new voters since the referendum.
That's right. Well, we ran that on the first day of Drugstore Culture. We ran that in our as a poll.
So it seems, and people will say, well, the choice was made in June 2016. So what's that got to do with anything?
Yes.
But it's going to affect them more than anybody else, and it's being enacted now. So I think that there's a perfectly moral argument for saying they should be able to have an impact on it. And I personally think if it was put back to the people, that Remain would win very convincingly, by 6, 7, 8%.
Well, there was a Sky poll yesterday, which I thought was very interesting, that suggested that there's that there has been some sort of change recently, and with each passing, as time passes, it is clear to me that the notion of a people's vote is becoming something that people take seriously.
Yeah.
The question remains, in the midst of all this sort of soap opera and everyone focusing on personalities, is how, other than through journalism and through campaigning and so on, and they are important, how do you see the people's vote actually happening? I mean, does it need to be? What's great about it, I think, is that groups like FFS and IFOC have given it a grassroots meaning, and the march was fantastic because it wasn't just London. It really was a national event. It was very exciting. How then, though, does it actually get into the very knotty process of where we are? So we know there's going to be a vote early December. Let's assume there is. I mean, who knows? But what are the steps that get you to a people's vote? Is it one of the main players, one of the main party leaders, or someone else saying enough is enough?
Yeah, I think. The first thing that I think is going to have to happen is that there needs to be an extension
of Article 50.
I don't think that. Well, the thing is, I don't think the time frame should be the question. How monumentally tragic would that be?
If we were just doing it in order to
throw it away, just
a curfew,
to hit that dead date, that would be nuts. But that is where we're at right now. So I think if you can move that time pressure a little bit, things become a little bit easier. And I think it would be in everyone's interests, especially the European Union, to give the UK enough time to let this current chaos play out to the next
Sure.
couple of stages. And if there was a new Tory leader with whatever agenda he or she had, if Labour were whatever position they took in it, there's no majority for any one single solution. So I think at some point John Bercow is going to have to say, we need to find a route through this, and I'm going to facilitate that process. And I think the inevitable result would be a people's vote, because nothing else will get through.
So you see this as primarily falling on the Speaker's shoulders as the representative in a sense of parliamentary democracy at its purest.
I really do, and I think he also, he's in an interesting position, isn't he? Because he's not going to be there much longer. He's got nothing to lose. He has I think a good character in being determined to represent what he sees as the spirit of British democracy rather than the rule book of British democracy. It's very interesting when you hear Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about, this cannot happen because of clause 72 of the House orders, and all of this stuff. I think a speaker like John Bercow would say, well, it can, mate, and I'll facilitate it. And I think by that point, and this is very interesting as well, we keep talking about the UK. The European Union has a very important attitudinal role to play now, and I think the stonewalling that's happened up until now has got to stop.
Yes.
And I think the Remain campaign, interesting betting odds, right? It's 2-1 with Ladbrokes now that there'll be a referendum at any point in 2019, right? So not before March 29. So 2-1, I think is pretty good value, but it's 5-1 that there'll be a referendum and Remain will win.
Really?
Right? And it was 10-1 last week, so it's closed down massively. But they still see it as a big bet. And I agree with them, because I think unless there's a really visible articulation, a real articulation from the European Union that they have understood our pain, they understand how Britain's pain relates to what's going on in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, in France, and people like Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk give at least an assurance that Britain would have a place back at the table in not any humiliation, but would be a key partner in the rebirth of a new European Union that addressed some of the problems that caused the Brexit vote in the first place. And I think they've got to do that now. Someone's got to start, Macron or Merkel. Merkel's, again, in a very interesting, complex place at the moment, but somebody to say, listen, there is a way out of it, and not only is there a way out of it where you can come back, but there's a way out of it where you can come back and you will be that same voice, and we need you to help us remake Europe to be the Europe we all want it to be in the next phase. Now, it's got to happen now, I think, to give MPs
completely
something to latch on.
And also, I think one of the things about having written political columns for quite a while is that it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the only things that matter in politics are what happens at Westminster or Holyrood or the Welsh Assembly or whatever. Whereas in fact, I think in this case, the gravest liberal error or the centre ground error is to think that there's a pendulum. That the pendulum will swing back automatically, and it just won't. I mean, if this is to happen, if this people's vote is to happen, it'll happen through agency, it'll happen through titles like yours, Drugstore Culture will do its bit. Unions, very small caucuses, people actually activism. And I don't know if you share this belief, but I kind of, the shout out this weekend is that, yes, of course, what's going on at Westminster is a sort of extraordinary spectacle, but there is a job of work to be done. Is that something you sort of share?
100%, and I think all of the problems that the Remain campaign had before the referendum, I think they're still extant now. And I'm sure you're part of those long email chains of 97 people all having quite nuanced intellectual debates about messaging.
WhatsApp has kind of changed the way.
Totally.
It's amazing, isn't it?
But I wonder what they're talking about in the pubs of Liverpool and the bus stops of Altrincham or wherever it may be.
The way it mustn't be framed is the liberal elite asking for its job back. it must be framed as a final say.
Yeah. Well, so to that point, Edward Heath, in the original referendum, talked about this idea of a people's veto rather than a people's vote. And now, to me, that's a very compelling perspective, because it's not saying let's do it again. The word veto is a very clear thing, right? You can stop this.
Yes.
Now. You can put a stop to this, and you've been let down, and all of this has gone very badly pear-shaped, and we now all, and honestly, you and I, we must both be bored sick of hearing those old, it's like buying a house, and you get the stuff back. But all of that stuff is true, and to say to the people, in a very literal way, you have an opportunity to stop this.
Yes.
You have a veto, and I think that would be the positioning I'd take on it rather than people's vote. I think people's vote sounds sort of nice, but it's flawed in many ways because it sounds like a marketing message as well, and I think people are suspicious now of that inauthenticity of something like people's vote. It just sounds like...
Well, it's more like a sort of cooling off period, really, isn't it? It's your opportunity to express buyer's remorse, which is a perfectly normal... Interesting thing on the referendum, actually, is that one of the sort of early theorists of the referendum, A.V. Dicey, used to refer to the referendum as an idea, as sort of early 20th century, late 19th, explicitly as the means by which the public could stop the government from doing stupid stuff.
Right, yeah.
And I think that this may be relevant in this instance, because if ever there was an example of, look, this isn't working, this is your chance to
totally.
to stop it and make them think again.
Totally.
I mean, final question, Matt, which is, I kind of abandoned political prophecy a long time ago, but exercising my totally unfair position here, if I had to ask you where we'll be in a year, what would be your best guess?
I think we'll certainly still be in the European Union. I think we will...
As part of a backstop, or actually as a full member?
Well, no, I think as a full member.
As a full member.
So that's my belief.
Yep.
And I've always believed that. And to be, without wanting to sound like mystic, Meg, I felt like there was a sort of inevitability of this process. And if you follow the narrative arc of the Brexit story, and I know this sounds simplistic and stupid, but it feels like a movie to me in many ways.
Has a narrative shape.
Like a 5-act movie.
Yeah.
And it does. And the only way the movie makes any sense to me is there's the great reversal. Yes. I cannot believe we're going to allow the sort of tragic end of Act 4 just to limp on out to the fading credits. I think there has to be... Britain is too good for that.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is too febrile for that. The people are now, I think, becoming really re-engaged with this crisis in a way that they've never been before. I think the engagement is higher than it's ever been before. And I cannot believe that we're going to do this to ourselves. So I think we'll have had, by this time next year, I think we'll have had a second vote. We will have voted to remain, and we will be, I hope, the optimistic spin on it would be that we are back at the table with Brussels, and we are arguing with Merkel and Macron about the things that caused this horrible situation in the first place.
Matt, it's a pleasure. But everyone, buy this wonderful newspaper. It is absolutely excellent, and I can't recommend it highly enough.
And can I just say, it's not just all about boring old politics like this. There's loads of art and culture and
other stuff.
Good stuff, interesting stuff.
We love it. Yeah. Come back and see us soon.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.